This Series 1 Land Rover stood outside for ages, until I had the time and motivation to start the restoration. In that time, the trees grew through it and the birds made it their home. But eventually I pulled it into the garage and started the restoration. From the day we rescued this Series 1, I'd wanted to restore it. You can see the story of where we found it and how we recovered it in the first video of this series, Restoring a Legend. I've always liked the look of a Series 1 107 pickup, as it was the first long wheelbase model introduced by Land Rover in 1954 and produced until 1956. A total of 20,000 of these Series 1 107 basic models were produced. Mine is a 1955 right-hand drive export, so it was assembled in Solihull and produced for export. In 1954, the 80-inch was extended to 86 inches, and this is when the 107 wheelbase was introduced, and it was available as a pickup only at first. Both new models had recessed door handles and a new instrument panel, which are the two obvious differences to distinguish it from the earlier models. This restoration was going to be particularly difficult, as my vehicle was not 100% complete and had been abandoned and not running for decades. So I had been gathering some of the parts I needed before I started, like the radiator panel, a new bonnet and tailgate fittings. The two major parts I was missing were the rear axle and the engine. But this wasn't a big problem because I decided to install a 2.25 litre engine and use the Series 3 axles anyway. Finally, the day came on November 9, 2018, as I swept off the leaves of the bonnet. It was time to pull this Landy into the garage. It was amazing that the steering still worked after all those years of standing idle, and so we could tow it in and park it ready for the big disassembly process. The disassembly process was surprisingly easy, considering how long this vehicle had been outside in the elements. Most of the bolts that were protected were fairly easy to get off, and there was no real issue. But there were some of the bolts that were a bit more exposed in the areas that weren't covered, and those ones needed a bit of persuasion with the angle grinder. Slowly but surely I was removing all of the body panels and even the more difficult parts like the steering box that's notorious for getting rusted into place. And then also getting rid of all of the sand and old oil and junk that's been building up in the chassis. To scratch that out was quite a job. Eventually the last thing to be removed was the gearbox, and then everything was apart. I had all the body panels off so I could clean everything up and start to inspect it and see what had to be repaired and what had to be replaced. The doors had a little bit of repair and a little bit of replacement, and the roof luckily was looking quite good, so that would just need paint. And then I was left with just the bare chassis, and now I could really start rebuilding. I hope you enjoyed that episode of how I got started with this restoration process. Thank you so much for watching till the end. In the next episode, I'm going to jump ahead to today, where I'm busy putting the engine together and getting it ready to fit into the chassis. So please join me next time, and I'll see you then. Thanks and bye.